Very good. So let's keep going. So we have this notion of the data center. We have the extended B-tree index that you see on behalf of Google to account for all the web pages that have been scanned and who have been categorized by their content and the links associated with them and various other proprietary algorithms. These are these large water-cooled sort of industrial centers. You have to supply power as well as take away the heat generated by these racks. And then you have to have them sort of combined together with some software that gives you that ability to distribute the incoming work and then distribute it among the free CPUs and memory. And so Google is really one of the primary purveyors of this data center architecture. There's been several eras of innovation. One beginning with these large shipping containers that could be sent, on a flatbed as the machines are built, and then they can be internally cooled. Now we're in a more modular era where each of these may contain their own separate cooling environment. But this is the business requirement of running these kind of facilities. Now we have new sort of farm fields and other areas that are more friendly to establishing these data centers. It moves to make solar data centers, moves to make them in cornfields or other agricultural areas. Other areas of the country where there's significant hydropower. These become very productive places for these data centers. Of course, the world needs a lot more of these. There's going to be these opportunities in the rural areas and the cheaper areas of the world for them to be created. I want to talk more about the rise of Google. Google really sees the web page as the primary medium. There's been very little effort on behalf of Google to install software on your computer. Google really wants to keep your experience within the web browser. Increasingly within the mobile device now, but originally it's really to leverage the power of the browser to deliver web experiences. Google is probably the greatest exponent for HTML5, which allows for pages to become software-like. There are a lot of layers of code beneath that enable rich visual services to take place. Google Maps is an initial version of not an HTML5, but an HTML page that contains a kind of an image-like surface that can be pulled. The early Google Maps was astonishing, as you could pull the page in various directions and it would load imagery in almost a predictive way. These would be images that would be downloaded from a satellite that was formerly a government satellite, a keyhole program on behalf of the CIA to grab, earthly images and city street. There was a very famous technical engineer behind the work whose name was Brett Taylor, who spearheaded the effort, was kind of the Eric Schmidt of his time, but in Google Maps. And they pioneered the use of representational state transfer, or REST, in moving data down to the page either before or as it was requested. And it created a culture of web page creation that was second to none. It would be difficult for other companies to duplicate this anytime soon. And Google was able to stage Gmail on top of the same representational state transfer and create a name for itself, distinguished above all others. This seemed to be the primary place. Once you had gotten your computer, you would get on the web browser, and that you would navigate over to the Google search, you would get the Gmail, and then you would get the Google Maps. And then later they would simply layer location information as businesses would provide descriptions of itself. And now Google Maps is more than just a way to get a map. You can get directions to places, but also you can index the local business environment as Google understands it. So the Google Maps becomes kind of a visual index to whatever an area can provide, as well as telephone numbers and addresses, and now that you have it on mobile as a way to move to the business when you have information on it. So Google distinguishes itself as kind of a purveyor of the deep data center, then as the rich client experience. It kind of perfects that Hotmail HTML data center culture, and it builds up its own brand. Brett Taylor, the top engineer on Google Maps, eventually goes on to become the CTO. This Brett Taylor eventually goes on to become the CTO of the nascent Facebook, that is in the process of engineering away from the Facebook wall to a more real-time data feed. Brett brings a lot of the expertise of the Google Map experience, the representational state transfer, to Facebook, which now becomes more of a data company as it sorts through the many messages that it wants to put inside of its wall. So at the same time, we have a Democratic Party that is emerging from 8 years of constant setback, searching for new personalities. You have since the age of 2004, you have you have an Obama senator who is an excellent orator and is really rising at the same time that Brett Taylor is creating a social media capability to provide a real-time internet. Obama's oratory is exactly what the country had been looking for after 8 years of kind of the anti-orator of George Bush, but also is kind of an America that folks did not recognize. People were willing to give a fresh start to a relatively unknown and whose background was undescribed. There was no real public information as to his background or core beliefs. And so this combination of world-class oratory skills and a Harvard Law background puts him in the middle of a social media climate that is really ready to publicize this man. So he blows through his competitors in the Democrat field, namely Hillary Clinton, whom he eclipses in terms of in preliminary elections, and goes on to win the presidency as kind of a social media president, and engenders websites such as Twitter, Black Planet, and each of the other social media platforms in the process. Very soon after, the iPhone goes public and becomes an innovation. In the first year or two, it is a $600 to $800 sticker price, and largely becomes the province of Los Angeles, Manhattan, and San Francisco. It's not thought of as an every person's phone, but it is bought up by some of America's most capable people. I had a good friend who was a network administrator at IMG in West Hollywood, and of the day after the iPhone went live that weekend, 600 new talent agents had one the day after, and they were largely dissatisfied with it. The phone was without any specific apps. It had a few applications. I believe that you could do a few text messages. It had the ability to load Google Maps, of course, which is a major component. You could make phone calls, and you could go to the web. But what happened was that the company of Apple has two consecutive hits, namely Jobs' marshaling of the music industry behind his iTunes platform, and then the iPhone. And Apple establishes itself as a company that has been fully reborn by 2008. This potent mix of social media and the phone engenders an environment where Kevin Systrom, a Google employee, forms Instagram in his free time. Outside of his work at Google, it was coded over the course of several days. Systrom becomes one of the first great mobile brands, if not the first, in the creation of Instagram, which is bought for $100 million the week or days before Facebook announces its IPO. It was bought unilaterally without approval of the board and becomes one of the major properties of the nascent Facebook brand. Now, Facebook is a web company, and it emerges from that HTML5 culture of Silicon Valley, but with its purchase of Instagram and then later WhatsApp, Facebook firmly becomes a mobile company. Snapchat is a great Los Angeles area triumph. The Stanford grad, I'll remember it, Evan Spiegel of Santa Monica, born and raised in Santa Monica, becomes somewhat of a metacritic of the Facebook experience by offering a message platform where messages are destroyed the moment they are sent and received. The Snapchat platform immediately becomes a favorite among young people who feel that their freedom of expression is expanded with the Snapchat experience, and it's clear that the future is not going to be just a Facebook experience, but Snapchat provides a very relevant contrast. Now, what has happened is the Snapchat is largely capitalized by Silicon Valley investors, also Saudi investors, at the same time that the NYT enters near bankruptcy and is rescued by Carlos Halou Slim, the reportedly the wealthiest man in Mexico, arguably one of the wealthiest in the world, is an owner of telecoms and becomes the single largest shareholder of New York Times, which is it's just failing under the weight of Google's ability to locate news. It's failing also in an era where news and links to websites is largely dependent upon being forwarded through social media. But the New York Times, nevertheless, is rescued as the grand dam of journalism. Now, just to visualize the status of major media companies that are responsible for both news and entertainment, there's really five major components of the news, entertainment media landscape. There's Disney, CBS, Viacom, Liberty Media, and NBC, and Time Warner, of course, no longer affiliated with AOL, but it is really capable to speak with 6 or 7 individuals and determine the trajectory of what is published, what is not published, and what agendas are made clear within media. This era of the internet, one would have gone from a small, roughly 30 media companies in 1983 to approximately 6 in 2011 into a massive consolidation of media authority. Largely it has to do with the public watching precisely what they want to watch, the emergence of news platforms on channels such as Yahoo, and the new emergence of YouTube, frankly, which popularizes whatever message wants to come across, and the freedom of publishers such as Alex Jones to put out whatever the message is and receive an audience commensurate with their appeal. So, and it's interesting to contrast this matrix of media companies who are largely in possession of the cable dials with the prevalence of just a small handful of consumer food companies that dominate almost every aisle at the grocery store. But you can see that we have all these historical brands that are subsumed and made property of this small collection of major food companies. We're just simply in an age where one major corporate head can efficiently manage a host of smaller brands because of this sort of Walmart-style brand of internet-based computation and local management. The CEO of a Disney, for example, could simply look at the progress of each of the shows happening in ABC. The head of NBC could simply survey the progress across each of their business models and could intervene where necessary. So this is a process that makes the grocery store largely a production of a few very capable organizations, and it makes the cable your cable subscription a production of a few very capable brands that can manage its brand portfolio. We are operating. It's wise to go and give some credence to the roots of the premier of China, just in a change in direction, who in the early 80s was emphatic that that China enter into a period of manufacturing and mastering Western modes of value creation. Deng Xiaoping was emphatic that China embark on a program of modernization where factories were installed and factory conditions are created so that the mass of China's mostly rural population could locate work inside of factories and then open up that process to the rest of the world. It's a reverence for Western technology and a need to master and duplicate those technologies. China then becomes a rising power from then on, especially as we achieve a détente post-Nixon in our ability to meet and open lines of diplomacy with China, and the U.S. enters a period of major synergy as China becomes a competent manufacturing partner post-Nixon. It's interesting to look at a different tangent, but on the proliferation of media with mobile devices. Netflix is a Silicon Valley firm that comes from Reed Hastings and initially becomes a video rental service that competes head-to-head with Blockbuster Video. Blockbuster had made its franchise based on DVDs being available to you as you come in and you rent a DVD on premises for $3, and that becomes your entertainment for the evening. You can walk away, drive home. It's a cheap, easy way to get access to Hollywood within a year or two of movies being issued. Netflix duplicates that model over the internet and then introduces its own brand of streaming entertainment, where a Hollywood movie would simply be decoded into a streamable format, would be hosted in a scalable, high availability, failover-proof data center, and then it would be disseminated on a web browser, and then later a mobile app. And as it becomes a mainstay in a Wi-Fi driven iPhone and smartphone context, it becomes very easy for each of us to have our own media preferences, especially when the recommendation algorithms inside of the Netflix platform that guarantee that you receive recommendations on shows that are similar to yours. So there's this commingling of the big data center that is enabling distribution of a fast residential internet that is a Verizon production, so that people receive a fast fiber to their homes, to a residential home that is now a Wi-Fi environment, but also to a big data infused Netflix that can simply locate synergies and affinities between shows so that as you make choices, it can make smart recommendations to you. We find, the public finds that it is watching much more content than it used to, and it is receiving precisely what the individual prefers, and it is overtaking many other media choices. Just a simple comparison between Netflix and its immediate competitor HBO would show a huge gulf of performance between HBO and Netflix. As Netflix slowly ruined Blockbuster, its competitor, it is clearly becoming one of the dominant forces in Hollywood itself. Now, an important content that an important innovation, of course, we talked about SSL in the possession of Netscape. SSL becomes an important technology where two partners can exchange information through an initial key exchange that encrypts their conversation just between themselves. This makes it so that e-commerce can make a strong presence across the internet, and it enables a whole wave of innovation as companies across the country engage in this. It opens the door for new firms that you can utilize payment processing via environments such as credit cards, Visa, MasterCard, where SSL can be can be used to transfer credit card information. It creates a whole new environment for e-commerce. Now, just to give a sense of what the encryption looks like, typically the internet must transfer characters. And so if it is not encrypting, it is just simply going to transfer the open characters that are typed in. Now, this is the message that's being sent, and this is its hexadecimal equivalent as it's typed out and as it's sent over the wire, and then it's translated back into human readable language and moved into whatever application or web browser you're using. So these are 3 stages of transmission, but eventually the message is readable on the stage. So SSL succeeds in creating a person-to-person encryption that creates a message that is garbled and is unreadable unless it's read by the 2 people exchanging information. This is an important innovation that e-commerce is based upon. Now, the U.S. has been historically rationalized, and largely by 1976, you have this kind of rationalization where the U.S. is built into zip codes so that the postal system can work, and then it's built into area codes so that we can deliver phone calls effectively. We're in the LA County, so you have our area codes here, the Inland Empire and the Riverside area. Orange County, they have their distinct phone numbers, and then also IP addresses are also established this same year. So that by 1976, we can enable internet connections via TCP/IP. We can enable postal delivery via zip codes, and that we can enable phone calls via area codes. So this enables a context where the internet could be converged roughly 1992 as Al Gore and Bill Clinton, new vice president and president, take office and then set a mandate for the Bell telephone providers to converge and create a United States internet. Frequently, Gore is criticized because people believe he said that he invented the internet. I don't believe that he said that, but certainly he was tasked with having the different Bell systems get together to agree upon a common TCP/IP standard. But that convergence of telephone companies by 1992 creates the context wherein the encryption available by the Netscape Corporation could enable a national, even a global scale e-commerce. So I just want to talk about how the 1976 rationalization of the country really lays the groundwork for an internet decades later. Now, another important innovation that was taking place at the very end of the 60s was the emergence of the structured query language and the emergence of relational databases. Relational databases are built upon the premise of organizing tables within a single database, and the tables contain structured attributes, and we will fill in data related to the attributes in rows, so we create a breadth and depth of data within each table. And the databases provide what had been already a fact of life among the federal government, but now private corporations could avail themselves of SQL services, and they could do vast organization-wide queries in order to compile reports and to gain business intelligence over operations. The foremost purveyor was the Oracle Corporation, that availed itself of the innovations in algebra, relational algebra, where the Venn intersect of 2 data sets would be expressed as a union. And this late 60s logic became a very strong way that relational databases could be designed and executed. The Oracle database was the first such made in 1968, I believe, as the Oracle Corporation was, Larry Ellison's consulting group was given a contract on behalf of the Air Force to organize a database for all the parts necessary to repair bombers in the Bay Area. So this leads to an era where we have databases and we have the very beginnings of big data. When we think of the IRS, we can think of it as a huge supercomputing organization where massive stores of machines, this is a staged photograph, very few people are doing this, like looking at the machines and, checking off boxes. Okay, the machines are still there. They have not walked away yet. But we have data centers that can house applications that can respond to large bodies of data. I file my taxes this way. Probably some of you have done that. And the IRS can cross-reference W-2 information that have been reported throughout the year and really standardize very smart revenue collection for the entire country. The big corporations now, it's very standard for each of them to have their own topology or collection of networked data centers. Home Depot is the United States' #2 retailer behind Walmart. At the scale that they work, they must maintain massive data centers. It's interesting, this one is located in Austin, Texas. There are a great number of data centers there, Texas being a cost-effective place to locate data centers. There's large amounts of land at good prices. There's well-educated workers throughout the state. Texas becomes a very relevant state-to-stage tech innovation. When we look across the world of robotic manufacturing, these robots are commingling. They are intersecting with our large data-driven culture. It's giving us rise to companies like Tesla that are making new manufacturing paradigms here. The more that we innovate large, big data, the more that we develop AI and algorithms that are helping us to, or the more that we do big data, the more that we are generating algorithms that are helping us to do artificial intelligence that will add to even more even more intelligent management over facilities where robotics are being used to manufacture things. And this is a strong rationale to believe that U.S. manufacturing it's not going away, but it will take on new features. 3D printing operates as an important paradigm where prototypes and ideas can be scripted in a digital design format and then printed using a cheap, easily fused plastic. 3D printing is now seen as a critical component of the digital design ecosystem, where a smart set of designers anywhere could create a design and then feed the design over the internet to a robotic manufacturing plant. That thing could be made with great scale. So the way that the delivery of goods, especially plastic goods, will proceed may well happen without a great deal of human interaction, just on behalf of highly skilled, highly trained individuals who can assist a robotic system for printing to take place and production to take place. We have a new environment also where you have Bitcoin, which is a global payment processing network, where if you own some Bitcoin, you can transact with others. It takes about a half an hour now to finalize a Bitcoin transaction. In some environments, the Bitcoin transaction can be as little as 39 cents. Some environments twice that. A year ago, the price of transacting a single transaction would be about $50. So the price of Bitcoin transactions is going down. I like to, at the point of, when this video is made, we are anticipating $10 billion worth of Russian-based Bitcoin purchase to be made in order to enable them to skirt U.S. and Western sanctions on their oil Venezuela has made similar steps to make a crypto-based petroleum purchase. And probably Russia will make similar moves to enable their oil to be bought, sold via Bitcoin. It makes an interesting environment for transacting because it simply occurs outside of the auspice of central banks and outside of global bank transaction processing. So it has an interesting future because if e-commerce businesses are adopting the same currency as major OPEC governments, then probably the transaction fees for doing e-commerce will decline or disappear. Currently, they're roughly about 2.22 or 3% of major transactions, which curtail even e-commerce companies from realizing their potential. But if Bitcoin were to become a major global force for e-commerce, where there are a lot of owners of Bitcoin paying many service providers with Bitcoin, most likely small business globally will receive a 3 to 5% boost in profitability based on the use of Bitcoin alone. So the Bitcoin will become advantageous to those who are selling things, i.e. a Russia or a Pokemon figurine producer somewhere that wishes to sell something without that added layer of cost for the buyer. Interesting future trend. China remains one of the leading sources for Bitcoin production. Bitcoin, it's required to have it mined, where a machine is busily cracking an encryption puzzle that, once validated across the Bitcoin environment, causes for that miner to be rewarded. Currently 12.5 Bitcoins, worth at this time, roughly $3,500. Several very large Bitcoin mining firms were established in China back when Bitcoin was a couple of cents. It was very cheap. It was seen as a way for the emerging non-U.S. World, namely China, to have economic autonomy in a world that potentially could see massive sanctions. At this point, the Bitcoin miners remain working, but certain Bitcoin miners have been asked to leave China. They no longer receive the state subsidies, the subsidized power. The Bitcoin mining just costs $3,000. Well, it's more like $3,100. But for those Chinese miners who were pushed out of China, they are now in Canada, other parts of the U.S., where Bitcoin mining is roughly 25% more expensive. Interestingly, that's its recent price bound right around $4,200. That's the cost of mining, of break-even Bitcoin mining in the North America, namely places like Winnipeg or Wyoming, where power is more expensive than it is in China. The rate for producing Bitcoin is roughly around $3,100, which represents a recent low in the price. Clearly, Bitcoin miners in China are seeking to eliminate Bitcoin mining overseas by not allowing Bitcoin to be at a break-even price. That explains its recent pricing. But we won't know. I don't have the ability to call them up and ask them why Bitcoin is at 31 and or 3,100 and last Christmas is right around 19,000. But likely there's an interesting future for Bitcoin, and it is probably going to be global around the world, not just the United States. New York has emerged as a huge capital for financial quantitatives to reside. This is an interesting parallel to high-skilled programmers in Silicon Valley who are working in machine learning, big data for social media. Here in Manhattan, they are working largely in big data related to financial markets. So NYC has an interesting future. Nowadays, if you are an MBA in finance, what I have gathered is that it is difficult to acquire a job on Wall Street with an MBA in finance. You now need a degree in financial engineering to qualify for the best jobs, NYC, trading. Those are the jobs that remain after this new quantitative culture comes into play. But I think it parallels an interesting culture that took rise during the Bush presidency, which was really the proof that high-frequency trading is an effective, sustainable modality for trading firms to take. There's many algorithms that are within Goldman Sachs, UBS Warburg, that sustain very large trading volumes that skim, that take advantage of small fluctuations in price throughout the day. They are making their inroads into cryptocurrency. They're the reason why markets sometimes behave the way they do. But this rise in HFT means that many firms can basically guarantee that they are profitable year in, year out, and they can take advantage of fluctuations in price that human beings cannot. And because of this, this is not a new development, but because of this HFT culture, during the Bush administration, many financial firms engaged in HFT on Wall Street were made the case to the federal government that those HFT firms could take over Social Security as a safe store value for the country. This idea was floated at the federal level. Fortunately, it wasn't accomplished during that time period, but I think we can envision a future where each of us will perhaps entrust our money to be managed mechanically, and it may become an alternative to Social Security in the future. But it remains certainly a standby of HFT, a standby of financial districts now. Clearly, the rise of Bitcoin is contrary to our traditional culture of central banking, not just here but around the world. But it's interesting that we have a business cycle that is dominated by monetary policy on behalf of the Fed. Within a Bitcoin context, there is this notion that we will escape the dominance of the Federal Reserve. That's an interesting prospect that brings many people together around the current political leadership as to what should happen. There's always been historically in America a struggle between central banks that issue currency and the federal government that must pay interest for third-party services to produce the U.S. Monetary supply. This is not a new culture, this protest of the Fed, but it serves as an interesting background to a financial system that is increasingly international, and it's much more real time. The Apple culture also creates a great deal of novelty. Currently, with the Steve Jobs' own industrial design, it creates an Apple product that ranks among the most respected design creations in the entire manufacturing economy. These are designed in California. They're manufactured in Shenzhen by corporations like Foxconn in China, by large groups of very highly, I want to say overworked, but high output workers that are making these creations. I think it's interesting that it locates the United States as an important design center. They're not being manufactured here. Many of its components are. But it's, instead of saying made in China, it's saying designed by Apple in California. I think it's an important gesture that Western companies right now bear tremendous responsibility for the production of ideas, especially in high creative zones such as California. I want to say that to our students here because really the expectation is this kind of perfect climate, this Renaissance climate in California produces an environment where people have confidence in their ideas, they're thinking creatively, and really teachers here should be giving them an outlet. But as to how your devices can be made, they may well be created robotically in other parts of the world. This is certainly my children, who are iPad creatures. But also we have a future that is looking more Vauban-esque, where we have a powerful motivation to close down borders And this is a very interesting prospect in an era of such tremendous cross-border information exchange. This is not just a U.S. phenomenon. It's happening all over the world. And it'll be an interesting new facet as we move forward. The truth of it is a great deal of U.S. Manufacture is done on the other side of the fence. And this is a fascinating component to look at as we create the ability to send ideas abroad and to move the manufacturing abroad. What is ironic in the NAFTA era is that after we've signed international agreements with China with Canada and Mexico, is that we have tremendous flow human movement into the U.S. after we do the trade agreements. This is a political dynamic that exists largely outside of our discipline, but it inevitably affects the way that large corporations will see Mexico as a possible place to stage manufacturing in this cross-border exchange. So fascinating for us in Southern California. You also have this interesting environment where media is closely tied. BBC is obviously a state-owned element, but you also have the ability for alternative media to rise to meet the public's demand for information that it feels it is either getting or not getting from large state-owned or state-affiliated media. So we're in a very interesting era where the public, due to its devices and internet connections, can subscribe to a media that gives it a completely different picture of the world. And it's very difficult to talk politics, facts, information with people who might be of a different set of information. So we have a vast, the public is broken into little tribes where they have agreement as to what is true and not true. This is very different, and it's brand new, because in the past we would just simply have three voices on the TV that evening. There'd be Tom Brokaw. There'd be three people giving us the world, and that's the world. And if you were educated every night, you were obligated to look at that picture of the world and understand what they're saying. Now it is broken apart into many, many different pieces. It's very interesting. I hope that we will have huge information available to each student. It will be interesting to see how they form a picture of the world via their Google searches. It's interesting to think that in the future, videos like the one you're watching may provide the basis for people to receive an education. It would be interesting for our context of data center, heavy data storage, categorized content, fast data transmission, almost Netflix-like data streaming, content streaming, that we can arrive at a world where people can receive a education that they could not years ago. There's this intense rise in homeschooling. It's not just among religious people who want to have religious autonomy in their own homes, but it's also, I think, a fact of the matter among the greater population who, frankly, learns very well with a YouTube video. So this is a very interesting fact. I know, frankly, within CSU, I'm being asked to organize this class as an online experience. And I imagine that there's thousands of other people like myself who are putting out videos for the same purpose. We expect that within 5 years, the CSU may simply become a much more relevant institution if we can reach many, many, many more people based upon this online delivery platform. We also are operating, I know here at CSU, many of our students go to work at the NSA. There's immense culture that breeds a sense that we are under surveillance. And recently, I think 2013-14, the emergence of Edward Snowden, it popularized the idea that there is mass surveillance. The NSA is engaged in collecting data on every digital interaction that we have. I'm not here to confirm or deny that. I can only say that the emergence of the Snowden story has created a lot of fear on behalf of the culture as it pertains to social media and their usage of public internet lanes in order to speak. Here at Cal Poly, we think a great deal about this. I think it has a tremendous the arrival of Snowden created this bombshell effect where ever since the NSA has been accused of this surveillance, we've always been talking about it. There's been a Hollywood movie made of it, so it's interesting that we have this emergence of surveillance is taking place. Whether it's happening or not, we may never know, but we are living in interesting times where the cross-border flow of information creates a fascinating context where ideas will flow across borders. And for example, do you worry about watching various YouTube videos for fear that you are cataloged as consuming certain ideas? And this is a new emergence that is taken place the last few years. It's going to become kind of a cultural phenomenon moving forward. I think that if by offering services that have anonymization built in, that product will become more valuable. And it's easy to see when you look at the rise of platforms like Snapchat that frankly people want privacy, and we are in a context where people believe that privacy equals freedom. Very interesting set of discussions that will take place going forward, especially if you combine the Bitcoin phenomena with this fear of surveillance. Can you be funding journalism that gives you a particular perspective that is of interest to you outside of the norm of regular media? That's yet another combination that's tantalizing, interesting. Certainly, WikiLeaks, which is a environment where state secrets can presumably be uploaded and shared. The WikiLeaks is now a Bitcoin business. They accept Bitcoin as a charitable contribution after they were cut off from more mainstream payment processing. It creates a very interesting scenario for new and emerging media. If you want to be free of that fear of surveillance, if you perceive it or not, perhaps accepting Bitcoin creates this certain degree of economic liberty. It's fun that Putin appears, because frankly, Putin will be a large petroleum, oil vendor in the same way that WikiLeaks will become an information vendor via this Bitcoin environment. So national borders, open non-state sponsored currencies, the demand for information liberty, for commercial liberty. These are interesting trends that are impacting us right now. Utah is a vast storage spot for NSA metadata right outside of Salt Lake City. Another important hop in the internet that's taking place right now. Of course, this is not a secret. This is here. It's kind of a compelling idea that somehow all of our information is stored here. It makes me think, wow, they're fitting a lot of our information into those buildings right there. That's, is that really happening? Is that, really I'm going to let you do your own research and come up with your own opinion. I won't be giving you any prescribed ideas, but let's use these concepts as a working plate. Do people have privacy? Do they need privacy? Does the state need to intervene and prevent certain information from getting out? Is certain speech not valuable? Is total freedom of speech compatible within a state security context? These questions are kind of, here's a fun one. These questions are of great interest to those of us here at the university, and I think in the open public as well. I mostly spend my time ogling the huge cooling plants, the huge water collection, and the physical edifice of storage, and keeping machines cool in a place that is 90 degrees and above 5-6 months of the year. I think we're operating with some openness here, but we're not. The story isn't finished yet. I'm just giving you a little framework, but to kind of watch as these trends, move forward. Now, we're also in a context where, because of robotics, because of global manufacturing networks, that because of cryptocurrency, that potentially a country could just simply print its own cryptocurrency, and then it could simply fund a basic income that people could use. I remember a Harvard professor coming in here and talking about this openly in our forum, Greg Mankiw, and it's an interesting idea. I'm not sure how we receive it here at our school because we're accustomed to studying to work. But it's interesting how is the world going to converge around kind of a basic welfare for all. If we continue along the path that we're continuing. And let me say that historically it is not, but there are those who would wish it to be so. So it's going to be interesting for us to watch how, do we stage, technological innovation here within countries that have universal basic income? Do we ask for a certain number of highly skilled polytechnical graduates to command our industries as we kind of create a utopian place for the public where they don't have to work, and instead they're fed a diet of life-sustaining chemicals and given soccer balls and being allowed to do backgammon in the park? It's kind of a digital socialism that folks, frankly, in Silicon Valley, in places like Harvard, are kind of mulling over. Are we headed to a world of automation where we are no longer in a world of work? And I just can't say that we are headed in this way. Usually the future is quite different than what we intend, but I think a smart Polytechnic graduate would simply scan the annals of history and say, has large public subsidy operations succeeded in the past? What is the history of large socialized movements? What is the history of large technological movements? Frankly, we're in an era where people are working a lot more. They're certainly earning vast amounts more. They have vastly larger homes, and they have huge amounts of personal expendable income and large pockets of free time. And we ask, have we come to this point just to simply go in the opposite direction? What students of this class can also talk about is, well, there's probably large facets of the population that are underemployed, that are looking for more job security, that are looking for perhaps a greater connection to international flows of work and ideas, that we can also build. So I want to encourage you to think in a big, expanded way that in no way is the future set in stone. In no way have we figured out the future. In every way do we need your engagement in thinking about, well, how should industries adapt to a new, is it a closing border environment? Is it an increasing global environment? Can we get more manufacturing done here? Is it easier for us to do robotic manufacturing in other places, and therefore should we be designing here? Should we be setting up manufacturing here? Should we be making manufacturing easier here? Is it better for us to make a fab down the street rather than over across the world? Is it dangerous to ship our ideas overseas? You all are able to take a fresh look and to talk about things the way that you see them after you've accumulated a lot of information. I want to encourage a very free speech, free thought environment. Is this the future? Do people want to be unemployed? Or is there a certain degree of natural subsidy that takes place right now? This is going to be fun for us to look at. So look, I appreciate it. Welcome to the class. I hope you have a great experience. You're in the perfect possible place to get a great university education. So good luck.